Hey, I'm Shy Fox. In this art tutorial, I'll be explaining my process for how I paint this semi-realistic anime style portrait. Semi-realistic anime means we're trying to combine aspects of realism with anime and meet in the middle to create a very pleasing and popular art style that is this combination. This artwork was created for a Draw This in Your Own Style challenge for an artist on Instagram by the name of comfyu.u. After finding the references for drawing and getting a more clear vision in my head of what I wanted to paint, I started sketching the head. I used the Loomis method for sketching a head shape. This method also helps me place facial features. I swear by this method for getting started, as starting with a circle can make me feel lost. This method gives me structure to work from that's a bit more three-dimensional. I'll be making a tutorial on how I do the Loomis method eventually. I'll attach a video link to the top right of the video here when I have it made, so you can go watch that, as it's an important step for getting started. So be sure to like and subscribe to see that video along with all my other art tutorials. The basic idea of Loomis is to divide a sphere 3 times, lines A, B, and C, and then have one of these lines go down the center of the face. Divide this section of the face into 4, and that helps you position the facial features, that being the hairline, brow line, nose, and chin. I sketch hair in sections. I like to think about the hair flowing in some way. Hair gives a lot of opportunity to make a piece interesting and add to the composition. This one was an underwater scene, so I felt like I could have fun with the hair floating in the water. I sketched the body by starting at the neck and using the understanding I have of anatomy to place the shoulders, breasts, waist, elbows, arms, and add a flowing shirt over top. I tried to show the folds of the fabric pulling at the points of tension and flowing out. I added some basic shadow areas to start thinking about how this piece will be affected by light, with the main light source coming from above. The sketch is nearly finished here, and I'm adding in the fish and thinking about how I can arrange them to create a pleasing composition. Composition is important in making art appealing. I have them positioned around her in a way that draws our focus back to the girl, which would look nicer than facing the fish any random direction and the fish having a straight body instead of a slight curve in the body like we have here, which is much nicer. I added the stars and then a gradient background from light to dark to represent the lighting that the environment will be underwater. I added in more dominant shadows of the piece and started to plan how the lighting would look now that the sketch is done. Time to add color. I started by adding in the color for the background that she's in. The color of the background determines how the colors of the character are affected. Because this is semi-realism, I really want the colors to be as convincingly real as possible. I used to just take a skin-like color and just start painting and wonder why my colors didn't look as good as some of my art idols. So here's what I do. I take my brush tool that has some opacity to it and do a stroke over my background. It mixes my skin color I picked with the background, and then I color pick that mix and use it for the base skin color instead. Interestingly enough, the actual color of the skin I began with was a green hue and not an orange one. It makes sense if you know anything about color theory, as the blue water environment really cools down all the colors of our character. I have the sketch layers over top of my color layers and turn down the opacity of the sketch. Ultimately, I merge the sketch into the piece and blend that sketch with blending brushes. Some lines need to be kept while others can just blend in, and some lines even just erased. I make decisions for this during the rendering. I section every area that I want to render separately. That just helps me having clean edges and being able to render faster. I rely on some organization of folders, colors, and some naming. In this piece, I had the face, hair, neck, clothing, and skin on the body all separate from each other, and then locking in the opacity for each. In this case, the organization strategy really helped me work fast through this project, as after setting it up, I knew exactly where everything was layer-wise in the project and could easily render each section cleanly and separately from other sections. With all of the base colors in, I was able to start rendering. I found myself bouncing around the piece, building it up. I used to find myself doing one section at a time. For example, I used to do the face, then the hair, then the body, then the background. But I found this method way better and a little more fun, being able to move all over the canvas at any point. It helped me focus on the big picture while creating. The background was one of the first things I rendered, not fully in the beginning, but I like getting a background going first, if I can, since it will have, again, not only affected the colors of the piece, but the lighting. It helps me decide how to color the character in the scene. As I rendered, I would do some checks to make sure it was looking good. A few main checks I do are the flip test, flipping the canvas to get a fresh perspective, a black and white test to check the values and contrast of the piece, a thumbnail test, which is when you zoom out far to see how it looks as a big picture or as a unified piece, which is the same idea as stepping back from a piece to look at traditional art. I feel having hard light really brings a piece to life, so I have a whitish light that has hard edges to it cast on various areas such as the top areas of her shirt, top of her head, and hair and arms. This makes it seem more realistic. I adjust contrast by adding a correction layer and using the tone curve, or by using the brightness contrast options. I added warmth into the piece by taking a red-orange color with the airbrush and painting it in between areas where light transitions to dark. This is basically subsurface scattering, which is important for making something more realistic. It is particularly important to do on skin, but can be used throughout the piece. Saturation was definitely something I was mindful of when creating this piece. It's important not to have too much saturation, so working with colors that are seemingly more gray is way better for achieving a realistic look than working with highly saturated colors. I added more saturation as I went along to the areas that look like they could use more. Areas with more light will have more saturation than areas in shadow that should typically be more gray in tone. I found that as I'm improving at drawing faces that I need to adjust the facial features often, as well as the jaw and cheek line. I'll usually use the transform tools to make adjustments. I copy paste a layer of the selection I want to adjust, make the tweak, and merge back together into the original layer. This also makes it easier to compare the changes before and after, turning the layer on and off before the merge. Many times I don't like the change, and I'll leave it as it was. By this point, it's looking pretty rendered, and I'm just going around the canvas making tweaks as I see them. I found myself adjusting the lighting of the face and hair quite a bit. I felt like these areas were the most important. You'll notice I spent very little time rendering everything below the neck. These areas were fine with basic rendering I gave them. I added some extra red color over top of the whole character in areas of light and added some blue color in the shadows. One of the rules with color theory is that if you have warm highlights, your shadows are cool, and if you have cool highlights, your shadows are warm. So adding this in after the fact just enhances that realism feel. This project took 5 hours to complete, and part of the intention of it was to do a drawing quickly. I'm working on my speed among other things. I chose not to try to perfect areas like the shorts, as the basic shapes that I had were enough to convey what I wanted. So as long as the colors and contrast is right with the correct lighting, these areas don't need much time spent on it. The shorts were not a main focus of the piece, and of the 5 hours spent drawing this, I probably only gave 10 minutes total attention to drawing them. I was able to save time by copy-pasting the coloring of the fish and the stars and only having to actually render one star and one fish. I then tweaked the lighting for each of them for the areas of the canvas they were on. Some final touches include any adjustments to lighting using my correction layers, again mainly focusing on contrast and saturation in this one. It can be fun to play with the hues and get some interesting effects with the color balance tool. I didn't choose to do that with this one. And here's the finished piece. I hope you found this video useful. If so, I'd appreciate it if you could drop a like and a sub. Feel free to ask questions if you have any on my process or suggestions for future videos you'd like to see me make. I live stream my art, portraits, and other types of artwork on my stream over at twitch.tv/ifox. You guys can come by and chat with me there and be part of our art community. Be sure to check out my other videos. I hope you guys have a good one. Bye, friends!